I'm going to introduce what we're doing here today. As many of you know, I'm Miriam. It's great to see some new faces as well as some familiar faces. As I said prior, we're joined today by Alon Chen, Tastewise CEO, and Taylor Sokol, who's Strategic Partnerships at Impossible Foods. Today, we are going to be doing something new, Tastewise Talks. It's an exciting forum for us to come together and talk about really the food and beverage industry's most pressing questions. In our day-to-day work at Tastewise, we have an opportunity to really touch all different parts of the food and beverage ecosystem. Sustainability is close to our hearts. We use food intelligence to really help the world's most influential brands create healthier, tastier, and more sustainable products. So it's one of our pillars for the work that we do. And we really felt that there was a need for an opportunity for folks to come together, have a real, casual conversation, a fireside chat, if you will. Hi, Riv. To talk about these issues. So today was going to be focused on sustainability and the bottom line. I want to make sure we spend as much time as possible today hearing the good stuff from our guest speakers today. So I'm going to quickly introduce them both, and then we will hit the ground running. So Alon, give us a wave. Alon is the CEO and co-founder of Tastewise. He is our fearless leader, calling in from the Tel Aviv office. He has a wealth of experience in leveraging AI and big data, which I know many of you on this call are already using in your day-to-day, across technology, business, and marketing, notably at Google. So he is a former Googler, where he initiated and actually launched the Google Partners Program in 27 countries, serving as Google's chief marketing officer for Israel and Greece, and leading the company's relationship with the World Economic Forum. When he's not incredibly busy with work, he is a human rights activist for the LGBTQ community, and holds a BA in economics and master's in law and an MBA from the University College Dublin. So thank you, Alon, for being here with us. Taylor, who's joining us here from Impossible Foods from the Pacific Northwest. He was telling us how chilly it is, so send him warm vibes. He currently leads strategic partnerships and field sales at Impossible Foods, a pioneering brand that you all know and love. He's an important innovator in the plant-based foods category. Prior to Impossible Foods, Taylor helped build the GTM strategy for a first-of-its-kind biotech platform for improving the way crops are grown. So that's going to be an important part of sustainability in the future. So I'm curious to hear more about that. And has spent nearly the last decade spearheading commercialization efforts for plant-forward and food tech companies focused on improving our food system. And while Taylor is not, he's not working at Impossible Foods, he's doing lots of incredible work in the ecosystem. He is a participant in the Humane Society International's HEP mentorship program, where he offers guidance to some of India's most promising food tech startups. So if anyone is joining us from India today, do let us know in the comments. Today, we're going to be having around a 30-minute conversation on business and the bottom line. We'll spend about 10 minutes at the end for a Q&A, but you are welcome to offer any questions that you have in the questions portal. You'll see it in the bottom right of your screen here. So feel free to send in any questions. Our team is standing live to moderate those and send them. And if anything that you'd like to offer in the chat, have a conversation amongst yourselves. We want this to be useful for you, so please feel free to use that chat function as well. And with that, I will leave Alon and Taylor to it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you for facilitating and organizing. And thank you, Taylor, for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here, as working for one of the leading brands in the plant-based space that really showed us all that there's a new way to do it, and there's a better way to actually provide a great burger, and then so many other platforms to the world that is plant-based and is delicious and is actually sustainable. So for the purpose of this call, we really discussed earlier, Taylor, in preparation on how can you get to a business that is both sustainable in an environmental and ecological, and as well as animal considerate, and at the same time profitable and is financially sustainable. So I would love to take the next half an hour to actually talk to you about your journey along the way, on how can we actually all learn from this journey, and how can we get such a massive opportunity out there to feed the world with better and more sustainable goods. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time.
No, I appreciate the introduction from Miriam and the invitation to participate in the fireside chat with you. It's Certainly flattering. Just to preface to, excuse me, just to preface that I don't have any advanced degrees in sustainability, right? It's not something that I went to school for. I've had the pleasure over the last 7 or 8 years working around the professionals in this space, and through osmosis, I've been able to pick up on certain sound bites that have helped me in my journey and have brought me here today to have this stimulating conversation with you all. My background and really my subject matter expertise is on commercializing these products. So it's taking all the hard work and expertise from the experts at the companies that I participated at, and going out, using that information to having really productive conversations with business partners, right, on the commercial side of the business. So that's really what brought me here today. I think that, the question that you posed, I mean, it's a loaded question, right? It's dynamic, and I don't think it's not a one size fits all. It really depends on the product, the business model, the geography. There's a lot at play there. I think that, clearly, if you look at demographics, if you look at, let's take like Gen Z, for example, which now makes up roughly, I think the last statistic I saw was around 40%. They make a lot of their consumption behavior is based on, I think, 75% of their purchase behavior is based on brands and products that have some sort of sustainability initiative, right? Mm-hmm. Which is really, really critical when marketers and salespeople and business leaders are building a story around their brand, and really the crux of why they exist. So I think that there's a lot at play there, Alon. I mean, I would kind of lob it back over to you in terms of, what has Tastewise experienced in terms of the powerful AI that you guys are leveraging, the data that you're seeing, the large CPG brands that you're working with. What are they telling you? What is the data telling you?
So it's an interesting, when we discuss it as well, but it's an interesting thing to look at the data when it comes to sustainability and see what is the top of mind for people when they're coming to actually consider the purchase of a new product or a product they already know, right? The first thing always, that we all know, it's like the price, right? And the taste and the brand, and like, what will it make me feel? Not just how it tastes, but is it going to help me get, to a certain social status? And then it's about, obviously, the availability, if it's there or not, and all the way through other claims and needs that they have. For instance, they want to eat something healthy. They want to make sure that what they eat is good and is not hurting animals, or it's good for the environment. And when you look at sustainability more specifically, and it's actually quite sad, but it's important to understand, the top of mind for consumers is not to eat sustainable. Sustainable is something that needs to be there alongside other things that they consider. For instance, when we look at a plant-based eating, right? The bigger consideration is health. It's 5 times more than animal welfare and sustainability combined. So the interesting perspective that we see from the data is that your product must be first healthy, and only then sustainable to be considered as a purchase. But what we see in so many categories, it's almost becoming a prerequisite, right? Not just because, you have to produce the product sustainably, because otherwise you pay, carbon credits, or you have to buy, but also because it is becoming more trivial. But it's not there yet. And that's the interesting perspective, that if you just look at sustainability, people don't care enough to change their purchase behavior.
Not yet. And I think that you and I in some of our prior calls have discussed that, right? That's something that I'm really fascinated in personally, is it's, incentives are a superpower, right? And I don't know if sustainability alone is going to move the needle in terms of purchase intent for consumers. Not yet, right? Mm-hmm. I think that, maybe if we look 5, 10, 15 years down the road, I do believe truly, my opinion is that will change, but it's going to have to be led. It's going to have to really, in my opinion, again, it's going to be led by governments, right? they're going to have to figure out a way to put some significant incentives in front of consumers in order to get them to change their purchase behavior. And even on the flip side of that, they could potentially penalize people, right? Like, there could be a personal sustainability score that each of us carry, right? Based on, at least on the retail side of the business, you have spends and IRI data, right? That they can back into, and they can look at, okay, what is your sustainability score over, the course of 12 months? At the end of the year, you're either offered some sort of a rebate or an incentive based on making healthy, purchase decisions that have helped the environment, or the inverse of that, right? And so I think this is a really fun question to talk about, and hopefully there's some entrepreneurs and some companies that potentially have incubators within their businesses that are working on these things, because I really do believe it's a part of the future of our food system.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see that in some categories it's not the future; it's already the present, right? Like there's in the plant-based or the meat alternatives, obviously there has been a slower pickup, but I know that in the dairy category it's already quite prominent to consume plant-based, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the proliferation of the alt dairy category, but it took a long time, right? This just didn't happen in 5 years. Where we have seen in the plant-based meat category, I mean, we saw a huge explosion of growth from 2018, through the pandemic. But I always like to benchmark, the alt protein category to the alt dairy category, because it did take quite some time, 2 decades for us to get to where we are today, which I believe, it depends on the source data that you use, but I think it makes up, close to 18% of the entire dairy market is now plant-based, which is incredible, right?
Yeah, it's really outstanding. And, it's interesting in the context of when you look at the data, and you have to look today at the data, right, to be able to make business decisions, and you look at sustainability, right? So pre-COVID, sustainability was rising really, really, really fast. And, right before COVID, there was a whole thing about straws, right? Plastic straws. And now we're like killing all the turtles in the world because we're using plastic straws. And then overnight, COVID came and sustainability was non-existent. People didn't care less. You could walk down the streets and you could see so many, masks, all over the place, which is, almost a lot of plastic and a lot of polluting materials all over the place, and it just dropped. So sustainability, when humankind had like risk for its survival, couldn't care less about sustainability. And then after COVID, you could see the graph going up, and it's a little bit higher than before COVID. So the trend line, if flattened out, is actually still quite positive trajectory, but still not prominent enough. And it's interesting, you're saying that the milk category is already near to 20%. It took a while, but we already see that in the meat alternatives, we see a much faster than 2 decades, right? The growth has been exponential in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's because there was so much noise. There was a lot of information being put out there around the impact that animal agriculture has on the environment, which it indeed does, right? I mean, you can look at the numbers and they just don't lie. I think it's half of all arable land on the planet is used to grow animals for food, right? They take up nearly 25% of all fresh water. Again, going back to, it depends on the source data, but it's 15 to 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions can be directly tied back to animal agriculture. So these are really significant numbers. And as we look at the population, as we go from 7 billion to 10 billion people over the next 20 years, I mean, there's going to be an inflection point, right? And I think more and more consumers, again, looking at like the larger demographics, that being millennials and Gen Z, they're paying attention to this stuff. Right? It's all over social media. I mean, it's all over the web. I mean, it's easy to access this information. And I think that's driving a lot of their consumption, like they're making their purchase decisions that much easier.
Yeah. But if we take absolutely, and if you take it like to the next level, and you think, why was, dairy alternative so quick to pick up, specifically milk, right? It's quite clear because it's much easier, right, to create an alternative when it's like more liquidy and the texture is much easier to solve. Whereas in the animal plant-based, revolution, it's a lot more complex from a food science perspective to get to the right texture and the right flavor and the depth and the deliciousness and the mouthfulness of a product. So the technology is picking up and is trying to catch up with the demand by consumers. Do you think we're there yet?
Yeah, and going back, putting a pin back in what you just mentioned with dairy, I believe from some of the studies that I've read is the proliferation in the alt dairy category was due to diet and allergies, right? Lactose intolerance, which is a whole nother discussion that we could have. I think it's completely different if we start looking at the alt protein, the meat analog category, right? And why it's grown so quickly. It's more to do with sustainability, right? And animal welfare than it is to do with diet and nutrition and health. Although that is a component, right? I mean, for example, you look at a lot of our products at Impossible, and right off the bat, there are some benefits in terms of health, right? Zero cholesterol, zero trans fat, no antibiotics or hormones. I think a lot of people aren't aware of, when you consume meat from animals. I mean, a lot of them they're subtherapeutically fed antibiotics to being kept from getting sick, right? Because of the environments that they're raised in. And so then we as humans consume those antibiotics as well and those hormones. And so, I mean, that's just one example, right? But
yeah, so actually, you're right. I mean, the first thing, as we said, in any food and beverage product, it must be first, tasty. Right? It need to be resemble what you already know, or it had to, mix up well with whatever you're doing. Like for instance, the big success of Oatly was because they created a barista version of it, so people that are actually in plant-based can have an amazing, cappuccino with an alternative milk. So that's one. But actually, when you look at the data, health, and you touched upon that, is again 5 times more important than anything else. And under health, obviously, you have the allergies and people that need that. But people perceive the category, the plant-based alternative, to be healthier than anything else that they consume from animal-based product. And because of the additives and all the hormones and antibiotics that the industrial part of the process must take into consideration and implement, which is very, very unhealthy for people. And taking it to another observation I had couple months ago, and I think I told you that a couple of months ago, we attended the plant-based conference, and we asked the audience, what do they think is the main motivation for people to consume plant-based? And actually, only 20% knew that it was health. And it's way before sustainability and animal welfare. So it's important to remind everyone that they really need to know the data and the main human motivation and need that make people, buy some product and not buy another. I want to take us to a different conversation, Taylor, about sustainable, financially sustainable aspects of plant-based, and specifically, how do you think is the best way to get a new plant-based product in the markets today? What's the right go-to-market strategy, and where would you start if you had to launch a new plant-based product? And I'll give you a hint or a perspective. I know that you're an expert in the food service category, and it would be interesting to hear about your experiences, making Impossible so successful in that category.
I think it's a great question. I think it's about creating brand ambassadors, right? And building affinity for your brand. And how do you do that these days? I mean, I think it's through finding individuals that can help make your brand famous. Right. We live in this TikTok generation. And so taking a page, and clearly, I'm biased having worked for Impossible Foods, but one of the things that we did right out of the bat was to go to these better burger chains, to go to, very influential chefs, Michelin star chefs that were, very meat forward, and beta testing our products with them and getting them to buy in and giving us endorsements, right? That gave us a lot of tailwinds in terms of going out to the rest of the food service or food away from home community and saying, hey, listen, if this very famous chef that has built, you know, a restaurant empire around meat from animals is saying, hey, these products are just as good, if not better, than the products I've been serving in my restaurants. Well, clearly, you know, that endorsement is going to get our foot in the door, right? And going to give us some momentum growing the business. So, I mean, if I was going to launch a new product in the plant-based industry, I think that clearly was a playbook that worked quite well for us. And I think that I would probably replicate it for sure.
So basically what you're saying, building a brand today may be easier if you do it through the food service, right? Distribution channel versus retail, right? Because if I analyze it, and if we look at the data from our perspective as well, actually when people walk into a restaurant and they look at the menu, right, and they see something new, their cost of trying the product or the dish is just the price of the dish. It's not about buying the ingredient in a supermarket, a grocer, and then going home and trying to cook with it and make something of it. So they're just their need is just like they want to try some new things, but they don't have to have a high bar and a high price for entry. And that's been an exciting new space for a lot of brands. By the way, it's been like that in the beverage space for quite a while now, building your beverage brand through food service and through the restaurant distribution, because you put your brand in front of consumers where they're ready to take a look. They spend minutes reading the menu. Whereas when they go to the grocer, they're just going and they usually buy the top 100, you know, SKUs or items that they're used to, and the need to try something else is a lot more difficult. And if you look at the menus, and by the way, we look at 100 million menu items every single week. We analyze every single menu item every single week across more than 1 million restaurants in the US and in 700 markets that we're covering. And we try to see what's trending, and we see a lot of new brands trending. Whereas if you think about it, it was just beverage, and now it's going into, it was beverage and condiment, right? The Hellmann's, the Heinz in the past, and now it's a lot of food brands. So is it getting also very cluttered? You know, you pave the way to other brands to confuse a lot of the restaurateurs as well.
Well, no, I think you made a really good point. I mean, food service, they're two different strategies altogether, right? I think food service can help drive trial, but you see very few manufacturer brands actually branded in food service on restaurant menus, right? So that's a challenging conversation to have with restaurants. You know, many of them, what I've seen in my experience being a participant in this plant-based space is that many restaurants will say, hey, I'm just gonna say that your plant-based meat product is vegetarian or vegan, right? And we are, we highly encourage our restaurant partners to put our brand in front of those menu items, because we've done so much work in terms of building brand equity that we know based on the sales data that if they do use our brand, that they will sell anywhere from 2 to 3 times more, right, than just calling it out as like a veggie patty or a plant-based meat patty, right? And I think a lot of that branding is complemented by the efforts of our retail team in retail and building our presence in retail and finding really, really great partners that give us the visibility and, you know, help drive that adoption. So I think there's certainly 2 different strategies, no doubt, but complementary to one another.
Yeah, and I think that food service is taking off. The food service go-to-market strategy is actually becoming mainstream. I was just at a food tech conference last week, and every other startup that came and showed their goods were actually, and now we're working like with 50 top chefs in New York and in Chicago and in London, and we're trying to get them to adopt because it's a trial and error. But it's also interesting to talk about the for the first time maybe. In the food category, beverage category, it has been there for a while. You know, you buy your soda both in the grocer but also when you go to your favorite, you know, diner. But in the food category, and especially as you mentioned it very clearly, branded food. So there is actually, they clear up, they clearly say that it's the burger patty made by, right, Impossible, and that's something new. But it's also impacting retail, right? It's also helping the retail raise awareness. So there is a lot of correlation and interesting adjacencies to actually building your brand in both channels today. Any perspectives or observations on that?
I think that the way that you just described it made a lot of sense. I think one of the things that I was thinking about was, as you were describing that, was the cost of having a sustainability strategy, right? It's something that I often think about for challenger brands that are looking at getting into the space. What is the cost? What are the input costs, or the hidden costs? And I think it's an interesting way to look at it. And something that I've been spending a lot of time on is customer acquisition cost. And I know that the cost to acquire a new customer, right, is 5x what it is to retain a current customer, or make sure your current customers don't attrit, right? And thinking about that, it's a much more profitable strategy to have some sort of a sustainability play that's associated with your brand, because it can help drive sustained growth and sustained profitability. So for these younger brands that are looking at getting into the space, that's one thing to certainly pay attention to.
Yeah, interesting. And if you had to rank, the sustainability and obviously the cost of acquisition, and as we say, consumption frequencies, it's so important, because if consumers are not going to be buying your product again or ordering the dish again, you have no viable, financially viable product. And it's an important thing to actually contextualize the product in other dining occasions or eating occasions, so they actually think of your brand and actually bring it up when they actually make a decision, which is something that, coming up with the right content, making sure that you're meeting them at the right point and inspiring them on how else they can be using the product that they bought or the ingredient they bought in the grocer when they're walking into their home kitchen and trying to fix, dinner in 5 minutes, or, a nice fancy meal for their friends when they're coming over the weekend. So one last thing, if you had to break down sustainability and say, here's what I think people care about most, what would it be? Would it be like food waste, recycling, climate change? Or do you think it's just the ethical, consideration around animal welfare? Any insight on why people would go for sustainability? Or what is sustainability for consumers?
Yeah, I don't know if I would rank it like 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 like that. I think they're all equally important. As we touched on earlier, I think obviously health is a big component, but I mean, food waste is becoming more and more prevalent in all of these conversations. And when we talk about our food system, right? I think it's one of the statistics that I read recently was that if food were a country, it'd be the third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, right? It's incredible. It's nearly, half of all food that we grow and produce ends up in landfills producing methane, right? And then you have to look at the full life cycle of how food waste is impacting our environment. I think food waste would probably be up there in terms of, rankings, but I think all of them are weighted equally.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking at the data, and actually food waste is the number one. So when people think about sustainability, generally food waste is number one, but it really differs from a category to category. So I'm sure if you're interested in the data around your category, Miriam can help you pull the information. Any of the viewers on the call. Miriam, I guess if you showed up, we need to wrap up.
Hi. So no, I actually want to spend another 10, 15 minutes on some of the questions that we've gotten in from the audience here. There's some really good ones. But before we do that, I want to remind everyone, we have a few polls running that we would love your feedback on. A lot of folks have already voted. One of them actually, Taylor, was which sustainable solution do you think is most urgent for the food and beverage industry? And 75% of respondents have also said cutting food waste. So it seems that there's a lot of alignment here in the audience, which makes a lot of sense based on what we've been talking about. So thank you very much for your perspectives on this conversation. I could sit here for hours and listen to you both. I want to make sure we have time for questions from the crowd. So I think we'll start with, we're going to do, I think, 5. So just keep that in mind when you give your answers. Let's start with this. and this is a question that came in to me privately. How can brands tackle this balance between planetary health and personal health? Where do you start when creating a new product? So you talked about this kind of inflection point where consumers are juggling this investment in personal health, right, which reigns, and then planetary health. And obviously these are susceptible to the changes in the market and what's going on in the world. So what should brands do when they're thinking to create a new product and get their foot in the door? How should they be tackling these two focuses?
Yeah, I mean, for my opinion would be, first, you have to start with health. I mean, obviously the product has to compete on taste. It has to taste really, really good. I think we look at one of the terms we use is plant-based anxiety, right? Some of these legacy brands, that have been around for years and years, that actually were marketing and creating products specifically for vegans and vegetarians, right? Which are very, very important. But if companies like ours that are mission-based, that are trying to have a major impact on climate, are going to be successful, we've got to bring everybody along for the ride, right? And that's why we know based on the sales data that 90% of the consumers that try our products and repeat purchase are indeed meat eaters, right? They belong to this category called flexitarians or reductitarians, right? Which I personally consider myself one of. I make a conscious effort a few days a week to reduce the amount of meat that's in my diet. But I think certainly concentrating on health first is definitely important.
I can maybe add to that, Miriam, that it's clear from the data that, again, consumers want health more than anything else, right? And that's a top priority for them. I think that from ESG, right, from social and corporate responsibility, and the way that the markets and governments are going to be putting in place the regulation, already the regulations in place, it must be both, unfortunately. Unfortunately, because it's more complex from business perspective, and fortunately because it's the need of the hour.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really on point. And to Taylor's point, we actually spoke with someone at Redefine Meat a few weeks ago who was talking about how this concept of meat generally, right, when we think about carnivore and flexitarian and vegetarian and vegan, even the concept of meat is changing, right? What do we define as a meat alternative, right? Is it premised on taste, experience, nutritional count, right? So I think consumers are, when you say bring everybody along, right, thinking about who is everybody, how do we speak to everybody in the language that they'll respond to, how do we meet their needs? And I think that's really pressing for brands to consider. I want to take us over to price. We've gotten a few questions here, one from Peter and one from Jeff, so I'm going to lump them together. Jeff is asking, are there specific categories that consumers are willing to pay more for products that are sustainable? And do you see other categories dipping into this? And as a kind of additional point, Peter asks, how far does plant-based compete on price with meat products? Retailers, especially big ones, tend to compete intensely between one another on prices, and in doing so, squeeze the margins for producers and processors. And we know that sustainable options right now, at least in the market, are not competitively priced for run-of-the-mill meat products. So let's talk about price, affordability. What does that mean for the future of the category, and how is it playing today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's interesting given the economic environment and inflation and what we've been seeing over the last few quarters with the animal agriculture industry has passed along several price increases, right? And they've been impacted much more than I think the plant-based category has as a whole. And we've seen the delta between where plant-based meat is being priced and where animal meat is being priced. We've seen it narrow, right? Which is a good thing, because our thesis is that if we can get our prices to parity with meat from animals, and our products taste just as good, if not better, and they're better for you, then consumers will just naturally choose plant-based products over their meat counterparts, right? Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see the impact of that, but clearly, we don't have the economies of scale as big animal agriculture companies do, right? So we also don't have the subsidies. That's something that we haven't really spoken much to. And I think we will see, in the coming years, we'll see some changes there. I'm optimistic, but your thoughts there, Alon?
It's interesting you say. I was as soon as Miriam asked, what I wanted to say is that animal-based protein is heavily subsidized by the government. So you spoke about, regulation to encourage, more plant-based. Actually, you just need to remove the subsidies or actually make them equal for the animal, the alternative to animal protein, and that will on its own make the difference. It's clear today that more plant-based sustainable options, are higher, are priced higher, just simply because it's for the early adopters that can actually afford more. And actually also from a branding perspectives by many brands, if you're not pricing your product that may already be perceived as a lower, more, it's not like premium, it's not the animal that we're used to, which is more expensive than the rest, then if you don't price it more than the animal-based protein, then you actually can hurt and damage your brand awareness and the brand perception. So the two, both the retail play as well as the manufacturers and the branding exercise, pricing is a branding exercise as well as the subsidies that must go away.
I want to add here something just before we move on to the next question. I think also within this constellation of ethical considerations that we're talking about here for planet, there's also a fair amount of social considerations here as well, right? As we're building the future of our industry and we think about socioeconomic access, equitable access to health, especially to sustainability, right? How do we ensure that products are competitive, offer health benefits, planetary benefits, are affordable, are accessible, right? There's so much to consider here. And putting the consumer right at the center of those decisions, I think, is the only way forward. Really understanding what people need and what they're looking for is crucial.
And that's where, honestly, too, to add a little bit to that, that's where having healthy competition is very important.
Yeah,
right. We want more people. We want more people to come into the space, compete with us, create really delicious products. Right. I mean, that's the only way that we're going to see, stepwise change in our food system as it relates to, animal ag and the plant-based meat category.
From marketing perspective, the market perspectives, if you think about the plant-based, pie, it's actually the mission that we all have is to expand the pie, and not just like the division between. And I think there's going to be a lot of prosperity to a lot of companies. So yeah, absolutely, raising awareness for the category is critical to changing the habits worldwide.
More pie for everyone. Agreed. It also correlates to, I'll just call out some engagement from the audience. So I'm seeing here in the poll about the biggest sustainability challenges facing food and beverage brands today, and noting that everyone in the audience is from, a food and beverage brand. So we're talking to the people themselves here. Balancing sustainable products with affordability is winning, right? So that's 30% of respondees feel that in their own day-to-day work. So I think you're right to kind of really touch that on the head. I think we have time for, let's do one more question. We'll do two more questions. So kind of hailing back to this conversation about consumer interest and consumer dedication to sustainability or interest in sustainability. So you mentioned inflection points. So a question that came in was, these inflection points of consumer demand for sustainable food and beverage, will they be driven by media, science, social pressure, or something else in 2023? So where do we anticipate the roots of growth and sustainable interest? Where do we think that's going to be coming from in the food and beverage industry in the next year?
Yeah, I think the entire category as a whole can do a better job of just, awareness and driving brand awareness with consumers. We need more points of distribution. We need to bring more partners to the table. We need to make sure that our brand is at the forefront and that people are seeing it everywhere. We need access. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, we need to be developing more products that are accessible in different areas, whether that's food away from home, whether that's non-commercial, college and university, K through 12, right? All these layers that are a part of away from home, and then all the access points that are a part of retail too. We just need to make the products more accessible, right?
Yeah, I think, Miriam, the short answer is going to be, it takes a whole village. But then as a company and as a brand, you really have to be, you're going to be managing your own fate. And I think that one of the observations I had in the past 2 years, where we've been helping a lot of plant-based brands to actually work out their go-to-market, is to actually they need to generate the demand themselves. So if you're thinking about food service, you can't rely on a distribution. You really have to work with the distribution partners, but you really have to be the one that generating the demand. And it all starts with understanding, okay, you put it on a menu and your brand is out there. how are people consuming it? What do they do with it? How do they respond to that? In which dishes actually the chefs are making that, turning it into a dish. So that's important to be like very, very close to the consumer. But I do think that if we're looking back at like the biggest changes in plant-based and the movement, sometimes it only takes an amazing new Netflix film to change, the habits of so many people. So I think it's clear that that's where the world is, going. It's clear that this is where the responsible organizations are going to make waves, and hopefully also regulators and governments. Usually they're late to the game here as well, but with consumers demanding and making enough noise, then actually it will make it to the agendas of the political parties as well. So
yeah,
speak up.
I think to sum that up, it's more pie for everybody, and everybody needs to be in the kitchen, right? That it's a group effort here. Thank you. So with our remaining couple of minutes here, I want to ask a large question, and it's a little unfair for me to ask you this with just 5 minutes left, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and also I'm curious to hear the thoughts of people who are with us. So feel free to put your answers in the chat. My question is, when we talk about sustainability in 5 years, what will be the focus? So when we have a Tastewise Talks in 5 years, Taylor, and we invite you in, what are we going to be talking about? What's going to be the most, urgent part of this entire conversation?
That is, I wish I had a crystal ball. Most definitely. I think the pace with which technology is evolving. I mean, and I would love to hear Alon on this using AI. I'm a big podcast. I love listening to podcasts, and I just listened to the Guy Raz, How I Built This, just interviewed Sam Newman, who is one of the co-founders of OpenAI and the past president of Y Combinator. And he was talking about the impact that AI is going to have in all parts of our life, right? And I think in terms of sustainability, as AI becomes more and more sophisticated and more prevalent in our lives, like it's going to play a big role in sustainability, most definitely. I think that AI could really, really change the game. I don't know exactly how that looks because I'm not an expert on that subject. And with that said, maybe I'll toss it over to you, Alon.
Yeah. So my answer, Miriam, is that AI is already changing the way people eat and drink and the decisions they make on sustainability and taste as well. It only takes one video from a 9-year-old kid that talks about corn to actually get to shortages nationwide.
And it's
actually being pushed by AI, right? Like the AI in the social media that we're consuming is actually getting us, on the same trend. Sometimes it's a good trend, sometimes unfortunately not so positive. But in the food case, we had the sourdough. Everybody's been making sourdough, and then you saw that with feta cheese, and you see AI coming into showing you a Wendy's burger when you're playing a computer game, and you can just order right from the metaverse. So I think AI is already ruling and really changing the way we consume. It's just like sometimes it comes into our top of mind, and sometimes it's just drifting out. I do think that from the food perspective, I think AI is also going to make big change. And I got exposed to some of the technologies a couple of weeks ago on production, right? So maybe how can you take different cells of different proteins, blend them together, and create something that is new. It's a new kind of meat that people will be consuming, that the AI was actually part of designing. And I think it's coming so soon, sooner than before. But here's my maybe the most pressing outcome from working with so many food brands and innovators in the past 5 years is that consumers must be part of the solutions as well. And understanding consumer behavior is the center of every single decision and every single business decision that you have to make. If you don't put the consumer in the center, and if you don't really look at behavior, you can't ask people what they think anymore. That's it. When you ask them in the food segment what they think, they lie or they don't know what to tell you. You need to look at real behavior and mass sizes and actually extrapolate what would your product mean to them, and then come up with your strategy. So data is of essence, and I hope that answers Miriam.
Yeah, that's great. And I think to your last point, it's by not asking consumers, it's not that you don't trust consumers, right? It's that you're letting consumers show you what they care about at scale, so that it's scalable for business decisions.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. Just to add to that, and then we'll wrap up for today, Peter offered as well that water availability or stress of the sourcing areas is important. Absolutely. There's also a lot of AI applications there in agriculture and food production about, diving deep into the ecological implications. So thank you to you both, Taylor and Alon. It has been a true pleasure. I hope, Taylor, that we can have you back for more of these, because I want so much more. I want to remind everybody, or let everybody know, that we have our next talk on November 16th with David Shaw. He's the ESG director for the international zone of Kraft Heinz. And that's going to be a different perspective from kind of big food. So looking forward to seeing what that looks like. If anyone is interested in continuing the conversation, please feel free to send me any live@tastewise.io is our email address. Send me any questions. Connect with Alon, connect with Taylor on LinkedIn. I know that they both are passionate about these subjects and would be happy to continue the conversation. And thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Miriam.
Looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Have a wonderful week.